My name is Felix Bartels, and today I want to give you a short update on what happened with Capano Meet since our launch event. So I haven't checked the list of participants who was in that introductory meeting already in January and February. And on top of that, I also want to show you something that I have worked on in the last few months a bit, which will in the future lead us to some Docker images for Capano, so you can even easier update your stack and keep your stack up to date. And I'll say let's begin with the webinar. So what we're talking about today, well, before diving into the webinar, a quick recap of our portfolio. So a lot of you are probably already quite familiar with Capano, but where we are coming from, whereas our base, our core, is the groupware part that is enhanced with some additional tools like an archiver or SMIME. The focus clients for us over the last few years have been our web clients, the web app, and the desk app, which bundles web app in an easy-to-use container for the desktop, so that it has a bit of a fat client feeling to it. And where we're quite good at is also connecting your mobile devices, which means basically all mobile phones that support the Microsoft ActiveSync standard. And on top of that ActiveSync connection, we also do the bridge to the old world with Outlook, and for this we have the additional add-on, the Capano Outlook extension. What we want to focus today a bit on is here the real-time communication part. So we still use MetaMost, which is quite a popular product in this niche, and provides chat. But what they don't provide, or where they are a bit behind, is the web meetings part, which is what we use for one-on-one calls and group calls, Capano Meets, and hopefully in the future also for these kind of webinars. But that's still a bit of the future. So for what we're talking today about, I already told you a bit in the first slide. So we're going to make a quick recap. What is Capano Meet? What have we been busy with the last few months? And then I'm going to showcase you two new functionalities that we recently added, naming screen sharing and inviting guest users to calls. And so after you have seen those nice features, you also want to know how you can actually make use of that. So I'll give you a quick introduction how to configure that for your in your own installation, and after that I'm going to give you some first impressions of some upcoming UI changes for Capano Meet. And after all that is done, like I said, we're going to do a quick showcase how you could run Capano containerized, to also quickly have, for example, a small demo environment where you can also benefit from Capano Meet and the screen sharing guest functionality already. If you have any questions in between, of course, just pop them into the chat. I'll have a look at the chat while I'm in the webinar, and I'll either get to the question immediately then, or I'll postpone it to a later slide. But let's begin. So, small recap. What exactly is Capano Meet? So a lot of you are probably already familiar with our old Capano web meetings, which, just as the software that we're using here at the moment, is based on the code of the company called Spreet. And it's a nice application in the sense that it also already is using WebRTC, so the Spreet web meetings that we're using. But it wasn't always that easy to get going. It sadly hasn't been updated for quite a while. So at some point in the last 2-3 years, we were thinking, okay, what could we do different in the sense of web meetings? And what we came up with is what we now call Capano Meet. So it's a completely redesigned web meeting application that is basically one client for all your platforms. So you can use it on the web, you can use it on your desktop, and you can also use it on a mobile phone, which wasn't possible back then with the old Capano web meetings. And to achieve that, this one client for everything, we're using something that's called a progressive web app. And I'm going on the next slide, I'm going to explain to you a bit further what exactly is a progressive web app, or what does that stand for. And Capano Meet, you can do easy one-to-one calls directly from your global address book. So your Capano users are displayed in Meet. You can do direct calls with them, or you can do groups and conference calls with users. And these calls are actually then really possible to be audio only. So you can, if you join a meeting, and you're on your phone and you want to preserve some mobile data, for example, because you're not in the best region, somewhere in Germany, and don't have the best mobile connection. So you can also join as an audio-only call, which will disable your video and all incoming video, so you can have, on a very small bandwidth, you can already join these meetings still. And Capano Meet already also has a very rudimentary integration into Capano Web App, which can simply be achieved with the intranet plugin, so you can have at least Meet inside of Web App. All these things, like for example the Web App integration, are still things that we are planning to improve on in the next weeks and months until the end of the year. But a bit further on the next slide. So I had just now I had this term progressive web app. So what is a progressive web app, and why a progressive web app for Capano Meet? And the nice thing about progressive web apps is that they are really designed to act as an app, a stationary app, a fat client, even though they are using web technology. So progressive web apps by design should be fast, because they have a so-called service worker, worker, yeah, that's the word I was looking for, a service worker running in the background that is caching, loading all the data, caching it to the local disk. They are designed to be responsive to design changes, to changes in the of the size of the window, so they're working on smaller screen devices, bigger screen devices, and are able to scale between those two. With that service worker, they're also meant to be resilient to shaky network connections. So for example, if you're in a call for a meeting, that's of course not the best use case, but for example, when we're talking about doing other clients as progressive web apps, as these new clients, we want to you want to have your calendar, for example, still available on your device, even though you at that moment don't have a connection. In the case of Meet, for example, you will still be able to see your global address book, you will still be able to see your contacts, even though when you're currently not online, you cannot start any new calls. And reliable, they're also reliable in the sense that a progressive web app by default needs to be SSL encrypted. So a plain text connection with a progressive web app doesn't work. And yeah, and they're designed to be engaging. So you can, if you open a progressive web app for the first time, you get a small notification on the top of the screen, and it's the same for Capano Meet. Hey, do you want to add Meet to your home screen? Which will then basically install a shortcut to Meet on your device. So you, as the user, can easily return back to Meet and yeah, give the user then again the feeling of having a fat client that is easy to use. And especially also with this link that will be installed to the device, that application then opens without the normal browser decoration, so you don't have your address bar, your favorites. So it really looks and feels like a fat application, even though it's a web client. Yeah, and talking about features that we still want to add. So Capano Meet is, in our personal perspective, already quite usable, although it still has a bit of rough edges. So it's not the most beautiful, the most user-friendly at the moment, but we're working on that, and I'm going to show you some screenshots in a few moments that show you what we have been planning so far. So it has some rough edges, but it's also in internal use already, and yeah, good to use. But it will not immediately still replace the old web meetings. So we still want to reach what we call a feature parity with the old web meetings. And we have already made some good steps with that, with the introduction of guest accounts and screen sharing. But there are still some smaller stuff, some more easy to use guest modes, for example, that we will need to reach before we can say, okay, Meet is now has feature parity with the old web meetings. We're going to replace the old web meetings with that. Yeah, and for the moment, Meet also still has a bit of a limited availability. So for the moment, it's still just available for Debian 9, Ubuntu 16.04, and Ubuntu 18.04, which for us also is the majority of platforms our users use. But the goal is, of course, to make Meet available for all the different platforms that we deliver the rest of our software for. So, for example, SLES and Univention and Red Hat as a platform. And I think I have to, sorry for that, I'm getting some chat notifications. Yeah. Yeah. Which means again that we currently have Capano web meetings as the primary chat and a video platform, but in the near future, sometime by the end of the year, Capano Meet will be the primary candidate for that. Yeah. Questions so far? Am I talking too fast, maybe? Or is everyone good? Then let's look a bit on for what happened recently, what changed recently with Capano Meet. So Meet itself, one of the fewest things that we didn't have directly on our agenda when making the first version public were, for example, changelogs. So it was all just in Git. But one of the smaller things of the recent days and weeks was that we now have dedicated changelogs for Meet, KWM server, and so on. So you can also, as a non-technical person, quite easily read up on what has changed. And there's a lots and lots of smaller changes inside of Meet. But there were basically two very big milestones that were achieved with also a specific tech version. And the one major feature that I'm going to talk a bit further on the next slide is screen sharing, and then of course the invitation, the possibility to invite guests. But also, so Meet isn't only just Meet and isn't only the signaling server, but Meet is also possible to a large part through Connect, which is our OpenID Connect provider, and that also has evolved over the last few versions. For example, we at Capano, we are very, very open source minded. I hope you know that. And most of our code is actually licensed AGPL version 2, but we have been approached by a few other projects that want to integrate Connect. And in those discussions, it became clear that for them it would be beneficial if we would even use an even more permissive license as AGPL. So we are going to relicense Connect with the AGPL public license version 2.0. And also, if you have heard maybe of the project called ID for Me. So ID for Me is an ID provider in that sense. But it's an ID provider you can run on your own. And Capano Connect, I think it was in version 2.21.0, we went to that ID for Me hackathon back in the CloudFest in the Europa Park. and work there for a whole weekend with the rest of the ID4Me team to be able to use Capano Connect as a so-called agent and ID provider for ID4Me. That means that if you have a running Capano Connect and you have set up DNS sec, then, and of course, that's the next step, you see a web service offering you to log in via ID4Me, you can actually use your Capano user and your Capano identity to log into that third-party service. And yeah, partly also in the quest to broaden the support for the different distributions, Connect also gained the ability to work as a so-called relying party. And that is important for platforms that already have an OpenID provider, like Univention, that is also using Connect to provide OpenID support. But you log in to the ID provider of Univention, and you're not logging in to the ID provider of Capano, which means that Connect needed a way to translate these tokens and to verify your own identity, which is now possible in the latest version, which means that we have made a large step in to working working for Capano Meet to UCS. Ah, Nico, you're in as well. So, how would you use screen sharing in Meet then? And the good news is, and that is something that we learned relatively shortly before our last webinars, is that Google finally implemented the so-called Screen Capture API in Chrome 72. And this is an API that is also supported in Firefox browsers version 66 and newer, and also most recently even in our own Capano desk app. And the nice thing about this is, when your browser supports the screen sharing API, you don't have to care for installing additional add-ons or extensions to be able to do screen sharing. So if you use, for example, a lot of different screen sharing applications, you will end up, without a doubt, with having 5 or more different plugins installed. But since we want to have Meet as easy to use as possible, and Meet and WebRTC in general is already something where you don't need to have any additional software installed, it's just working with the functionality of the browser, it was, of course, for us a welcomed opportunity also to say we wanted to provide screen sharing, but we want to provide screen sharing in a way where you don't need to install all those different plugins and extensions. So at the moment, like it is, you will see, if you have a most recent enough browser, and if you have updated your Chrome sometime since February this year, you will have a browser that will support this feature. Then you will see the small icon in the lower left corner and can do screen sharing. Yes, it will enable sharing the full screen. So not only the browser or a tab, but you can actually share your full screen. And how that looks inside of the call, so I have here myself again, which means that when you are in a call or already before starting the call, you can click here on the small screen sharing icon. Then from the browser, a question will pop up, hey, do you want to share your screen? Do you want to just share in a window? And once that is done, that's to signalize that you're currently screen sharing. At this point in time, this icon then will turn green. But that's also something, as you will see in the screenshots in a few moments, that we're currently thinking of how we can make that even easier to use and more obvious to use. Yeah, and the other major new feature inside of Meet is the possibility to add guest users. So it's at the moment technically possible, but we still have some UI bits, which means that the things that I'm going to explain now may sound a bit complicated, but I'll try to make it as easy and comprehensible as possible. For security reasons, users can only join groups or rooms that have a specific suffix to them. So in the default configuration, but it's actually something that you could also customize in your local environment, those groups, those rooms where guest users are able to join will need to have a specific prefix to it, like /public, which means that if you, as a user, create a new group, which, going back here to the last screen, you will click here on the small plus icon, and then you will get a question, a window where you can say, I want to create a group, and then you will see exactly this screen here. And here, as the group name, you simply say public / my specific name. So public, my meeting, public, webinar, public, customer name. And you click on create, and then you are yourself already thrown into this specific room. And to invite external users then, you have to add this small hashtag guest equals 1 to the URL, and send this specific URL then to whoever you want to invite to your call. So in the end, it will look something like that. Capano.dev is our example URL in this case, /meet/r/group, and then the group, the name of that group, of that room, public /my meeting, and in the end, hashtag guest equals 1. And you don't have to remember all of this long URL, because if you create a group, then you simply just have to specify the name, and the URL will be shown in your browser, or even from the welcome screen of that group, you have the possibility to say, copy this link, and then it's in your clipboard, and you can just throw it in your email client. And like I said, so the functionality is there, and as you can see, the exact workflow is still a bit rough, but hang on, so we'll have something in store for that relatively soon. And if you now, so just adding hashtag guest equals 1 is one of the things that you can do, but there are actually some more tricks you can, how you can influence the behavior of Meet and meetings that you invite people to by modifying the URL you can call. So also in the guests, in inviting external users, the way it is designed at the moment, I don't know, possibly most of you, hopefully most of you have used, for example, Docker in the past, and if you start a Docker container, they are creating a so-called, you could call it a fantasy name, so they're using an adjective and a noun, and this is then the name of the Docker container. And in Meet, we're actually using something similar to that. So if you don't specify a name for a guest, and the guest opens the URL, he will get this kind of a fantasy name assigned. But for some meetings, you want, for example, you don't want to have like the quirky guy or whatever shown as the name of your guest, but rather you want to actually have the actual name of the guest displayed. And this you can quite easily influence in the URL again by just passing a name option and then the name that should be displayed. And this was actually one of the few things that we really wanted to have internally when we started doing it for larger meetings where there's lots of viewers in Meet, but not everyone is really speaking, is that you can also, with an additional parameter, can influence if people should start with a muted microphone or a disabled camera. So we have, for example, every Friday internally a meeting where we all gather in Meet in groups of up to 15 connections. And through this parameter, we can then say, okay, you joined this meeting, but by default, your microphone is deactivated. So everyone can see everyone else, but it's not like one really big group of talking over each other. And one other small thing, one nice thing that you can influence with these parameters is that you can also specify if someone, so going back again to the screenshot where you can copy the link, you can also decide to skip this first step, this first window, and if someone directly clicks the link, that they're directly thrown into your call. Yeah. And these are some smaller nice tricks that you currently can do with the UI, that cannot do with the UI, but can do by specifying the URL of Meet. And these are also, you don't have to write them down or take screenshots now. They are explained all in detail in the Capano Meet manual. So just go to documentation.capano.io, select Capano Meet from the left sidebar, and there under Advanced Settings you will see all those options explained a bit more in detail. Yeah, and these are these two new big features inside of Meet. And if you don't have any questions about that, I'm now going to show you how to configure and how to use the guest mode. And why am I only showing you how to configure the guest mode? Specifically because for the screen sharing, there is nothing to configure. You just need to have a compatible Meet version and a compatible browser. Okay. Let's then jump into the configuration part. The only things that you really need to take care of is that you have the most, at least the here listed versions of Meet, KWM Server, and Connect. There's a question first. Do the rooms remain somewhere and need to be deleted later? Yes, they kind of remain. So it's not like these rooms are stored. But it's inside for each user. You could see that here in my masked screenshot. These rooms are basically just there whenever you use them, and they are not really something that is stored on the server. But each user has this recent call list where that room will be stored and will be there to be picked up at a later time again. So from here you can, with this three-dot menu, you can click to delete. Or since this is also an application that is touchable, you can also, with the finger, swipe them to the left side, and then you will get the option to delete these rooms. But the rooms will, they will always be usable, but it's not like they are, messing up your server. So they're not really stored on the server; they're just stored with each user. One important detail that maybe also comes back to your question a bit is that actually by default, even for external users, these rooms can only be used if someone that is actually logged into that server is also using that room. So if you invite someone else to an additional meeting, you have the fear that that person could start every now and then new meetings with the same URL. That won't be the case, because it will always need to, the meeting room to really begin always needs to have someone with a Capano account to be logged in there. And that's of course configurable, but the default configuration is meetings can only take place if a logged in user, a real non-guest user, is also part of the meeting. Okay, Matthias. If you're still here and you can still hear me, Matthias, there will be a recording that you can at a later date also view. Okay, but coming back to the configuration part of Meet. So you will need at least these versions because of all the changes with the guest users and turn server configuration, but by now there are actually more recent versions. So at Meet we're at 0.19, KWM servers I think at 0.15.3, and Connect is at 0.21.0. So you just have to update your packages from the repository, and then you just need to configure it. And how do you configure it? The important part here is that Connect, as the ID provider, plays a very important role in deciding, hey, this application should allow guest users or not. And for this, you have to at once register Meet as a specific client allowing guest users in Connect. And that is done through the so-called client registry. And I have here on the right side, I have an example of how this would look like, and you can get the full example also in the documentation. So we basically have to say, I have a client and that always has this fixed ID of K-pop, which is our our UI framework, our UI library, and then it's using the URL of your Meet application. And you have to say, okay, after that user is logged in, it goes to Capano Meet, and we have to pass so-called scopes, which is an element in OpenID authentication, that are then passed back to Meet, which is that connect guest OK and connect KWM. And the actual logging in is happening with the so-called JSON web key, and which is something that you at first need to create with OpenSSL, and then you can use actually again Capano Connect to generate a key from the PEM file that OpenSSL has configured for you. And after that is done, you basically just say inside of Connect, allow client guests, set it to yes, and make sure that the client's registry, so by default it's an etc Capano Connect D client registry YAML, I think. You can then restart Capano Connect, and the first part of the configuration is already done. And especially if you're, so it's a YAML document, especially if you, it's actually quite easy. And there are also some ways to do that automatically. If you're interested in rolling that out, I can again recommend to look at the Docker images that I will be explaining a bit further in a few moments. And this client device registry, so it's the same file that also needs to be handled over in KWM server, because also KWM server needs the possibility to recognize a guest user to log in and to meet. So you have to set enable guest API to yes, actually, specify the exact same file as in Connect, and then we have this public guest access token. This was what I said before, the prefixed name of /public for all your calls. So if you wanted to say instead of public, öffentlich or Gäste, for example, then you could configure that here. And then again, just restart Capano KWM server, and then that's already the second part of the things that you needed. And the third part, the last part, is that you need to, so Meet also itself has a configuration file, a JSON file element, and also Meet needs to be aware that you can use guest users. So here it's a simple switch of, in that array, guest enabled, setting it to true. And once all those three steps are done, I know it's sometimes easier said than done. Once all those three steps are complete, you can use those URLs like explained a few slides before. Just create a room for a user, put hashtag guest equals 1 at the end of the URL, and you can do public meetings. Yeah, and that's actually all there is to the configuration. So we tried to make it as easy as possible, as secure as possible, and I hope we succeeded in that. Yeah, and now before we go over to the Docker part, again, like I already announced, a few impressions of upcoming design changes. So we want to make Meet easier to use, and wants to provide a whole feeling of the new client applications that we're working on. So here come a few impressions we're currently thinking about of implementing. So what we currently have in the current UI is basically just a list of recent calls and your contact list, your global address book. But we of course want to enhance on that. We want to be able for users to specify their own contacts from their own Capano address books, and we want to have the possibility to predefine these groups a bit easier, because this is something that has already been has crystallized a bit, is that a lot of people, even though we as techies may not think it's really difficult to use those groups, it's not that seamlessly to use, not that easy to use for some others. So we will be doing some UI to make these groups easier to use and easier to grasp. And like I said, for the screen sharing, so at the moment we just have this very simple orange indicator that screen sharing is going on, but you don't really see what else is happening inside of your call. So we are thinking about adding a small preview of what you're currently sharing with your screen, but also some other smaller UI improvements, like a counter of how long is that meeting already going on. And most importantly, something that we're currently still missing, a small and easy possibility to go to your settings, to select the right camera, select the right language, and so on. And also, when you're in a call, to very easily add additional users. And then, of course, the big part, like I said, the guest users, inviting guest users is technically there. From the UI, still a bit not that easy to use, and for that we're then by clicking here on this Add User button, basically in the future we will be able to send out email invites directly, give you the direct possibility to specify, hey, I want to give that user a specific name, I want to invite them with camera on, camera off, and so on and so forth and so forth. Yeah. And for these tests, it's also quite important to have some outside interaction, some outside experience, because we, and I think I'm speaking for most of the people here in this call, we are either in our domain of technical knowledge, or we're in our domain of sales knowledge, but that doesn't necessarily always overlap with the domain of the standard user that you have at your customers. And we're currently prepping, and that's also one of the results of those screenshots. We're currently prepping another round of so-called user interviews, where we want to talk with regular users, want to show them how Meet is designed, and want to test, hey, dear user, please, where would you click if you want to invite another user to your call? Are you getting a call? What do you feel about that? What do you think is the next thing that you need to do? And for this, it's very important to have, like I said, normal users, non-technical users to talk to and to show those applications. So if you're thinking about, hey, I have a customer that really wants to use Meet, but the current web meetings is maybe not that easy to use for them, or they have some problems from the UI perspective with the old web meetings, then please send us a short email to feedback@capano.io saying, hey, I have a user that I want to, would take part in these user interviews, and and we will be following that up then with them. And that concludes the part of Meet. Are there any questions about Meet in general? And Meet, of course, works without Flash. As a WebRTC application, you don't need to worry about Flash support. One of the things that I did not really mention is, so we're, of course, for Meet also thinking about the use case of these webinars, of these bigger groups of people in a call. And the challenge with WebRTC is that it's a peer-to-peer connection. So if you have lots of users, it means that every user needs to have data connection with every other user in that call. And that's good from a privacy perspective, because there's no single point that is intercepting that data that is hearing all those calls, because it's all peer-to-peer, it's all user-to-user. But for some points, for some occasions, like these webinars, it's of course would be nicer to have this central point of contact, so that you can, as the presenter, can just stream your data to a single point. And that single point is then the handoff point for all the other users. And this is something that can be handled with the so-called selective forwarding unit, or a multicasting unit in WebRTC. And this is actually also something that we're currently looking into. But at this point of time, I don't want to really give an indication of, hey, this is something that we'll have by the end of the year and that we'll be able to scale to calls with 100 persons. And this is also one of the reasons why we're not using it for these calls yet. But there will be something to tackle those scenarios in the future as well. Okay. No question, I see. Then let's get even a bit more technical than with a few meat slides. And I'm going to talk a bit about Dockerizing Capano, or how we think Capano should be Dockerized. And there is, so if you're looking for quite an easy setup to demo Capano to your customer, to prospective customers, or even maybe even that, if you want to really get started with Capano very, very fast and don't want to get through the individual setup steps in your environment, then running Capano as a Docker container could be something that's interesting for you. And that's already at the moment on GitHub. So I've put our mirror here in the URL, since it's a URL that is easier to remember. So if you now go to github.com/capano-dev/capano-docker, you see there the full project. And it's following a proper containerization of all the services, and it's using Docker Compose to do the orchestration between those containers. And one important thing here is that it's started as a community project with an external contributor. You can still see his name here, and that's also still at the moment the leading project for that. So the community user Zokradon started these and had a very good idea of separating services and how to make those services easy configurable. And basically we stepped in at the end of last year and made a bit of refactoring, made it easier to use, and included some smaller tests and smaller scripts, so you can get quite easily running. And what it is now is really just a very quick and easy Capano demo environment, including users to already use. So if you do just a checkout of this project, then you have a small script called setup.sh, where you can say, hey, this is my domain name. If you just basically really just want a demo environment, you can just click enter and accept all those questions. Or if you want to have an environment that you want to couple with your existing infrastructure, you could, through the setup process, you can even say, hey, I'm using this existing LDAP setup, I'm using this MySQL database. And after you run that setup script, you just call Docker Compose app, and all the services will start, and you're good to go. The images of Capano that are available from the Docker Hub are actually based on our Capano nightly downloads. But that is, again, no, I'm going to park that thought. I have that in 2 slides. The first question, of course, then still is, what is in this project all? So I've already told it's a complete demo environment, which means that it also includes a web server, and it's using KWeb to also automatically retrieve an SSL certificate for that. It includes a mail server and complete MTA stack, including antivirus and anti-spam, and it's including OpenLDAP to manage your users. And the MTA stack and OpenLDAP components, these are not components that we have thought of, that we have designed, but that's the nice thing about the Docker ecosystem, is that there are already very good existing projects out there that can just be connected with your own setup. So by running this setup, you then automatically have something where you can send emails. Those emails will be scanned for spam, and of course have all our Capano components, including web app, including Zpush, including Capano Meet. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, so we have that setup script. So here, just as a very small impression how that Capano, how that setup script will run. That setup script in the end just asks some questions and creates a so-called .env file, which will be picked up by Docker Compose and is then passed onto the edge individual containers. So you can say, hey, this is my domain name, which you need for example, for the SSL certificate. You can specify your LDAP domain, where your LDAP server is, and which is also, I think, relatively nice, is you have the possibility to specify some plugins and languages that you want to have installed for Capano Web App, which will then be installed either at the container startup, or if you're building your own images, that will then be directly baked into the Docker container. And all this directly baking, and this is the thought that I wanted to park when talking on the first slide, that repository also includes a Makefile. And with this Makefile, it's for you, for the normal user, for the admin, it's really easy to rebuild containers, to tag them on your own, and to push those images to your own private registry or public registry even. But for the public registry, you have to be aware that when it's using our Capano repositories, at the moment that passwords to that registry will be inside of there as well. So you will probably at the moment will not want to push that to a public registry. And with that Makefile, building your own images, tagging your own images, the main idea behind that is, of course, that you then would configure our own repository, so you're not running the nightly releases for your customer, but actually running our supported releases for your customer. Yeah, and the Makefile then basically, yeah, the Docker files inside are designed in a way that it can handle your own repository and your own registry and your own repository names. So it's really just modifying the .env, and then you go into the Makefile and run make build all, and all the containers will be rebuilt based on your registry, for example. And the nice thing about Docker Compose, and there are even some examples in that repository, so we'll see, if you go there, you will find a folder called examples, and you can then add additional Docker Compose override files, and with these override files, you can then even enhance the functionality by, for example, here on the screenshot, I've included the configuration to run Capano with the mini I/O for attachments in an S3 storage, or if you don't want to use the Docker Compose that is bundled with that repository, you can of course just pick the parts that you like and just create your own Docker Compose. Yeah, and the container contains, I think, an amount of very nice so-called, let's call it bells and whistles, all these small things that make it a bit special. Like, for example, that the containers are completely configurable through environment variables, which in my opinion is what Docker is about. So it's not about starting a container and then executing into that container and fixing your configuration files. No, it's about passing all those environment variables, all those configuration options that you have as environment variables, and then start up the server. And therefore, those containers include the, let's call it, necessary tooling to read out all those environment variables here at the example for Capano Web App, to read out those environment variables and translate them into proper configuration files in the end. And also another thing, and a nice thing, Nico, you will relate for one of your apps in the App Center with that, for example. These containers use a utility called DockerEyes, which is very nice to get a basic order of services starting up. So Docker Compose by default just has a relation, oh, this container needs to be running for my new container to start. But Docker doesn't have a mechanism to say, oh, this server is not only supposed to be running, but it also is supposed to run a specific service, answer to your questions, answer to specific queries. And this is something that in these Docker images is realized through the utility called DockerEyes, with which we can simply say, hey, when Capano server starts up, and this is what this part of operation is a small excerpt from, I need to have my SSL certificates ready, which are created in a different container. I need to have a running MySQL database, which is already able to respond on the default MySQL port. And only if these wait conditions are met, then actually it goes further in the script and starts up Capano server, which I think is nice, because in a lot of other services you just start a bunch of containers. Okay, it didn't run on the first time. Now you have to start them again, and then maybe all the initialization has taken part, and you can actually use that platform. And that is definitely not the case here with these Docker images. Yeah, and that already concludes the hopefully not too technical Docker part of this webinar. And yeah, I hope you'll learn something new. I'm hoping you will take a good look at these Docker images. Yeah, it basically depends on your feedback if we actually want to make that a top level project inside of Capano. So if you say, hey, this is flexible enough for me to use in my customer environment, if instructions are clear enough, that's already a very important first step to say to make Docker a first supported platform for the rest of the Capano projects. Yeah, and Sönke, to answer your questions, yes, theoretically they can already be used for production environments. Can you upload the presentation, Sebastian? Yes, I will take care of. I think from when you signed up for that meeting, you had to leave your email address. So we'll make a small follow-up email to show you the slides. And the last question from News Capano. One question though, can we use Docker to somewhat run multiple customers on the same hardware like multi-tenancy? I mean, yes, you could run that Capano container multiple times. That's one way. Or actually you could run a multi-tenant environment with Capano. So it's the container again is flexible in its configuration, so it can also be configured to run a multi-server environment. No, Nico, I haven't bothered Eric with Meet yet. Okay. Yeah, I think that concludes the webinar. Is there a Meet demo online? I think at the moment not. So we're currently redoing our demo.capano.com environment, which actually also will be based on these Docker images. But I've checked before the meeting, and it wasn't yet the latest version. So it will take a bit until there is an updated environment that also includes Meet still. Okay. Could this be used to give someone access to Capano admin just in the container? Does not need full sudo access. No, I don't think that's that easy with that, because in the end you will need to have some elevated privileges to run Docker itself. I think you have my email. Drop me an email after this meeting, or send an email to feedback@capano.io. I have some ideas for you, Stefan. Classic multi-tenancy feature was more like small environments. And I think it was meant a bit different. So it's multi-tenancy is not a key priority for us, for our software, but it creates also for us a bit of support overhead. And I think that was what he tried to say. So it's something that you can also use for smaller environments, but it's nothing where we have the right pricing argument for small environments. I think it's Capano for multi-tenancy environment is more also financially attractive for you and for us in bigger environments.